I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer. I listened to the audiobook narrated by Carolyn McCormick. This is the story of a biologist who has been sent on a very dangerous, very covert mission to explore a place known as Area X. This is the 12th team of researchers who has gone into Area X to explore, and wildly different things have happened to every team. Hardly anything is known about Area X, except that a lot of teams have not come back, and the teams that have come back have experienced some very strange things. So all of the scientists going on this mission have been through lots of training, and they've been warned not to trust their senses, and they have no idea what they might encounter in Area X. So I really enjoyed this book. It was very suspenseful, and you spent a lot of time exploring the mystery and then delving into the main character's head, and it was just a great experience I would highly recommend. So if you think you might want to read this book, go do that right now. Don't look up anything about it. It's best to go into it with as little information as possible, and then when you're done reading it, you can come back to hear my opinions. So I had a great time reading this book. I thought it was set up really well. I loved how little we knew about the world going into it. And then even by the end, we didn't know very much about the outside world. We know a lot more about Area X, but we still haven't spent a lot of time on the world. We don't know if this is set in present day or in the distant future. We're not really sure, and especially because all of the tools that the researchers brought with them were fairly antiquated and they didn't bring any modern technology with them. That leaves a lot of room for interpretation, because it could be tomorrow, it could be 100 years in the future. We have no idea, and it doesn't really matter. It's not really relevant. The only things we see about the outside world are things the narrator remembers from her personal life. And so we know that the world hasn't changed drastically, but because she's so focused on just being a biologist, we don't know too many of the details of what Earth is like right now. I thought this book did a great job handling suspense. From the opening scene, we've already lost one member of the research expedition, so there are only 4 people left, and the narrator tells us right away that more will be gone by the end of it. And so from the very beginning, you're expecting people to disappear, and when they do start disappearing, that makes it even more tense, and then you find their bodies and you don't really know what to make of it. You think some have gone back, and no, they're really dead. And it's just such a great build, and I love the way this book built and built, but it didn't really build all the way through to the climax, and I thought that was really interesting. The tension keeps building and building until the last person there with the biologist has died. And then once she's alone, she doesn't really feel any tension anymore. She's just kind of slowly taking her time exploring the place. And I thought her character was really interesting, because all the things we see from her past and from her childhood, she's always been a very isolated person. She's never really related to other people. She's always enjoyed just sitting and studying the plants and animals that are growing in her pool in her backyard, or in the abandoned lot, or in tidal pools. And so this place is perfect for her, and she even says that she can't imagine wanting to be anywhere other than Area X, which is sort of terrifying, and it would definitely be terrifying if I found myself there. I would be terrified, but the narrator isn't terrified, because she is actually very happy there, and she enjoys so much about it. Even being anonymous. This is one of those books where the narrator is not given a name, and I probably wouldn't have noticed if she didn't draw attention to it and mention several times that they don't learn each other's names. They're just the biologist, the psychologist, the surveyor, and she actually seems to enjoy that quite a bit, the removal and not having to worry about names and just focusing on the task at hand, which is what she's always most enjoyed doing. It was also really interesting the way it was set up, so that you didn't know that her husband had been on the 11th expedition right before this one and had not come back. We later find out it's his doppelganger that came back, but she knew mentally he hadn't come back. And she talks about wishing that that was the reason she signed up for this, but it's not really, because she's so removed and she has such a hard time relating to people and relating to humanity. Her character actually almost reminded me of Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes, because she's very fascinated by humanity and she likes to observe it, but she doesn't really have emotional connections to anyone. She is connected to her husband, and he means a lot to her, but not in the same way he really would to a normal person. And that could be because of the spores. Right away she inhales those spores, and other people comment on it changing her. So I guess she could have been a normal person going into this and just changed over time. The narration we're getting is all from the very end of the story. You know, right when it's ending, she explains that she's gone back to camp and written in her journal and is telling this whole story from this one point. She didn't do it as she went along. She's just telling it all from the end. And so she could have changed personality a lot, but it doesn't really feel like that to me. It feels like she's just always been this, and inhaling the spores made her closer to Area X and emphasized her differences from humanity, but didn't really change that many fundamental things about her because she was always closer to nature than to people. And she still has feelings for her husband. You know, their marriage was breaking up before he signed up for his expedition, and that's a very interesting way. They both kind of signed up for this as a way of exiting life without admitting they're doing it, which was interesting. She talked about him being a shell of a person and almost hoping that that would happen to her too. And then she kind of got more than she wanted because she got to join the environment she's always loved to study, which seemed like in her mind it was a very happy ending. And she was definitely very obsessed with Area X and obsessed with the tower that everyone else called the tunnel, but it mattered to her a lot that it was the tower. And she was fixated on the lighthouse keeper from the moment she saw his picture, and you almost wonder if somehow she felt a kinship because he was the crawler. And she even acknowledges that she could have imagined that, but she's pretty sure she didn't. And throughout this whole story, everyone is talking about their compromised mental state, and they can't trust their senses, and they're all hallucinating. And so you wonder, as you're reading along, if she is hallucinating, if her senses have been compromised, and she is wildly misreading everything. But it feels so solid, and it feels like she is very lucid during this. And so it kind of gave me the impression that all of the people who really held on tightly to their humanity ended up clashing with Area X, and they panicked and jumped off of towers and became paranoid, and basically Area X kind of destroyed them. But the biologist related to it so much, and the lighthouse keeper too, related to it so much that they didn't clash with it, they assimilated and became part of it. And you get the idea that her husband probably did too. We don't know if he became one of the dolphins because he had gone out in the boat and she thought the dolphin looked familiar, or he could have become something else. And it's interesting to wonder kind of what the narrator became, because she's gone through and she's experiencing these changes. She talks about a bit of a brightness that heightens her senses, and oh, she looks down and her skin is glowing. And, you know, that doesn't really concern her a whole lot. It's just something noteworthy and kind of helpful when she's walking at night and needs a light to see by. And so she is definitely changing into something, and we don't know what it's going to be. Based on all of the things that she's loved to study, I picture it being something that's like an animal that's not super sentient, like a starfish or something that she's studied a lot. You know, she doesn't seem like she's really the kind of person who would become a dolphin or a fox or something like that. She seems more like she would become something still and not quite as far down the evolutionary chain. And then at the end of this, she's kind of reflecting on what is going to become of humanity. And she assumes that just more and more expeditions will be sent. We don't know how many hundreds have been sent before this, because there was the whole stack of journals. The Southern Reach has clearly lied about this being the 12th mission. And so they'll just keep sending people, and the ones who clash will not survive, and the ones who don't clash will just kind of assimilate into the environment and will continue creeping out. It was interesting, she talked about the doppelgangers being sent out as maybe a form of communication, which, you know, they didn't last very long. They all died fairly quickly after they left, but maybe they can go out into the world and sort of help this change go farther. And it sounds like eventually Area X will just consume the world. And this is the story of the end of humanity, basically. But because the biologist is so disconnected from humanity, she is really okay with that, because she kind of sees this as a new improvement that almost deserves to replace humanity. And the way that this ended was fascinating, because we have so many unanswered questions, but the biologist does not, and she doesn't care about the answers. She's decided that she's happy with this. She's happy to become part of Area X. She is going to love the rest of her life And as the audience, we still have a lot of questions that I would really like to know the answers to, but I don't feel as much of a need to know the answers because they're not really necessary. Area X is just going to continue to grow and flourish in its own strange, beautiful way, and the answers are fairly irrelevant. So this book is part of a trilogy. It has 2 sequels, and I have mixed feelings about that because emotionally this book felt so concluded and so wrapped up. The biologist's journey has definitely ended. So I'm assuming these sequels will be from someone else's point of view. At least I really hope so, because she doesn't really have anything more to say. Her arc is done. She has found her place in the world, and she is happy, and I don't really want to disturb her from that point anymore. But then I also feel like it could be really interesting to see Area X from someone else's perspective. And I also would like to know the answer to some questions, like how many expeditions have gone in? How long has Area X been around? What do we know about the founding of Area X? Is it like alien in origin, or some kind of a natural disaster? Was it some kind of a scientific accident? What happened? And I would also really like to know what the scientists are told in their training about the journals, because everyone keeps theirs so differently. This journal that the biologist keeps is just a narrative of what happened, but she didn't keep it as she was going. And her husband kind of kept a narrative of what happened and also wrote to her. And then there was the scientist who only wrote about a thistle, and the surveyor kept her journal completely blank, and some people wrote their journals in code. It seems like the journal was kind of a tool that was just there for the scientists to kind of help maintain their mental health, but then they also clearly knew that someone was going to read them, so I really want to know what instructions they got when they were given their journals. It would also be interesting to know what else has left Area X. Is it just the doppelgangers, or are other things creeping out into society? How fast is the border changing? What are the borders like? Because the biologist's husband went very far up the coastline and was expecting to see the border and didn't. So does that just mean the border has expanded much farther than people expected, or does space work differently in Area X? Does time work differently? And also, what is the border? Because they were put under hypnosis to cross, and the psychologist did something. So clearly, like, humanity knows something about the border, and it'd be fascinating to know what that was. So I think I probably will read the sequels, though I mostly just want more information. I don't actually want anything narratively different to happen, because I am really pleased with how this story ended. And it felt like a very natural conclusion. The biologist is happy with how the rest of her life is going to turn out, and I'm kind of happy with it as well. And so maybe the other books will be prequels, or maybe it will be some long drawn-out battle where humanity manages to defeat Area X. But I kind of hope it's not, because it would be just so much more fascinating if humanity just continues to be completely overwhelmed by Area X. So I'm excited to see what the new books have to offer.